All right guys, the plan for today is to install a cool product onto the UglyTruck to hopefully make the turbo spool up a lot quicker and build more boost, and hopefully we can do some rolling burnouts, which I think would be the ultimate cool thing to do in a turbo big block truck. My name's LT, and on this channel we build custom and high performance pickup trucks, which if you think that's cool, you definitely need to subscribe to this channel. Now the last thing you saw me do on the UglyTruck was build this right here. It's basically a muffler delete and side exit for the exhaust. And we ran it for all of about like 10 to 15 minutes, just long enough to pick up a little bit of rubber from the tire on there. And then we had to immediately take it off because that thing, it sounds awful. Now a turbo does remove some noise from your exhaust, but we've got a 132 AR T6 exhaust housing on this thing, which doesn't remove a whole lot of exhaust sound, and I just couldn't stand it. So it came right back off, and I basically put my MagnaFlow 4-inch full tailpipe exhaust back on. And I did try out the Flowmaster Hush Power. This is a Pro Series, 4-inch in and out, and it did sound kind of cool, but it does resonate a little bit because there's no tailpipe on it, and I don't have enough material left over to build another tailpipe. I don't want to do a dump because it would be pointing out like basically right on the rear shock or the sway bar, and I have melted sway bar bushings in the past by having an exhaust dump. So I'm kind of over the exhaust thing for the minute. The MagnaFlow sounds pretty good in my opinion for now, but I don't think I'll be 100% happy with it until we get the motor built with a little bit more compression and a lot more aggressive camshaft. I think those two things will definitely change the exhaust note and give it a little bit racier sound. So we're going to shelf the exhaust idea for now, although I will say I have my eye on some Corsa mufflers because I've heard a lot of trucks with Corsas on them. Ultimately what I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to have to buy one of every single 4-inch in and out muffler that they make, and I'll try them all. So that's an idea for another day. But anyway, today the whole project and the goal is to install this device that'll help this big S480 spool up a whole lot quicker. So as you're probably well aware, a supercharger is connected to the crankshaft basically by the belt. And so as the engine spins faster, the supercharger will spin faster and produce more boost. But a turbo, by comparison, is not directly connected to the engine. Instead, it uses a compressible medium, or the exhaust gas. Now, generally, the boost curve from a turbo will kind of have a nice, gentle ramp up. It'll sometimes taper off because of the wastegate, and then towards the top, it may fall off, or it kind of depends on a lot of different things. But this particular turbo, compared to the size of this engine, it is a little on the big side. That's an 80mm turbo. It's got a 132 AR exhaust housing with a T6 flange. It has a really massive and free-flowing exhaust side. And that's great because that means it will support a very high power level, my goal of 1,000 horsepower. But the trade-off to that is it does spool a little bit on the slow side of things. Now, if I were going to size a turbo for this engine for this power level, you know, 500 to 600 to 700 horsepower, I probably would have gone with like an S475 or a 472, but I wanted to just buy the turbo once and have it be able to support that 1,000+ horsepower number. So anyway, the trade-off that I'm dealing with right now is it just spools a little on the slow side of things. It's not awful, it's just I wish it were a little bit quicker. Now, I've done a little bit of experimenting, and how you drive the truck will change how it spools up a little bit. And on my last couple of roll race events, I did a little bit of experimenting, and if I put it in second gear and I just kind of held like 3,500 RPM and flat-footed it at the start line, the turbo would actually spool just a little bit slower than if I had it in third gear and just kind of idled up to the start line and then floorboarded it and had the transmission downshift to second, because that sudden rise in RPM kind of got the engine up against the converter, and it got a little bit more energy into the exhaust somehow, and it spools the turbo a fair amount quicker. But I want to try something that I've been reading about for a long time, and that's a 2-step rev limiter. So I've got one here, it's from MSD, and it's the same one that all the LS guys use, because essentially my 8.1, as far as the electronics and wiring is concerned, is a big giant LS. So it plugs into either side of the engine onto the ignition coil harness. It just bolts up to the firewall. There's 2 little dials, one for 1,000 RPM, one for 100 RPM. You just find a place to screw it down. We'll pick one of these to wire up either to 12 volts or to ground, and then we'll hit the road and see how this 2-step works. All right, so the installation of the MSD two-step is about as simple as it's gonna get. And I already did a quick function test just to make sure everything's working, which it is, and it made some pretty cool sounds, but we'll talk about how this is gonna work in just a second. Now, as far as the install goes, like I said, it is plug and play. And this is the same if you have an LS or a 8.1 because they all share the same electrical layout. There's a connector on both the passenger side valve cover and on the driver's side valve cover. And like I said, it's plug and play for the intercept harness there. And I had just enough wiring to run kind of down along the factory loom here up, and I screwed the two-step box just to the back of the electrical center right there. And it's kind of cool because it doesn't really stick out, you know, like a sore thumb, but I still have easy access to turn the dials to make adjustments. Right now, I think that test you just saw was like 3,500 RPM, but we'll play with it and see what works out on the street. As far as the switch mounting goes, that actually took longer than mounting the two-step itself. I've got it plugged in right here in the dashboard, right below the cargo lamp. I think the fog light switch would normally go right there, but I don't have one of those. I did choose a switch instead of a momentary button just because I kind of figured the way I want to use this as a switch will be a little bit easier rather than a button that you have to constantly hold down, because like say in a roll race situation where you're coasting up to the, or you're driving slowly up to the line, it's just one last thing that you have to think about, and whenever you're ready to take off, you just kind of flip the switch and Slingshot engaged. So when I was testing it in the shop here, I noticed it really quickly got up to like 0 pounds of boost, just that threshold between vacuum and positive pressure. But the wideband was going like really on the lean side, although I don't know if it was actually lean or if it was so rich it just kind of overwhelmed the sensor or what was going on. I may have to do a little bit more research into tuning around a two-step to see what will make it build a little bit more boost, but we were just kind of free revving in the shop here at a fairly low RPM. So now let's get this thing out on the road and see how it actually performs in the real world, or at least how I intend it to work in a racing situation. So we have the truck up to operating temperature, and I'm out on kind of a back road, or the closest thing I could find to it. And we're going to test out this two-step to see how it's going to work. And I'm going to do 2 back-to-back acceleration runs. The first one, I'm going to use tow haul mode to let the transmission hold first gear, kind of like I programmed. I'm going to bring it up to 3,500 RPM to simulate a roll race. I'm just going to floorboard it without the two-step and see how quickly it kind of takes off and how the turbo spools up. And then I'll do the same exact thing, except this time I'll have the two-step engaged, 3,500 RPM, floorboard it, let it start doing its thing, and then as soon as I'm ready to to take off, I'll just keep my foot down and flick the switch, and hopefully we take off a fair amount quicker. Now, to see how quickly it builds boost, I have another GoPro running right over here, and it's kind of sunny out, but I think it'll kind of pick up on the boost gauge. So we'll do a quick comparison run, and hopefully this is worth the investment. Okay, so first gear, 3,500 RPMs, like 37 miles an hour. So floorboard it and pay attention to the boost gauge, see how quickly it climbs. So it shifts second gear, and then it really starts to climb up on the boost gauge, and I hope that shot actually is something you guys can see. Just kind of what I noticed is when I floorboarded it, it'd take I don't know about time, but maybe like 1/2 or 3/4 of a second to kind of let that boost gauge kind of really get going. So let me slow down and we'll do the same exact thing, except this time we'll have the two-step active. I think I also may have a small exhaust leak. I hear a little bit of squeaking every now and again. All right, we got another clear stretch of road here. Tow haul mode engaged. I am still in 1, 2, 3. Let's see, 3,500 RPM. Watch the boost gauge. Certainly build boost a little bit quicker. I think that time I got to like 2 or 3 pounds before I took off. And it didn't take all that long, so it's definitely doing something. I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to raise the RPM limit on the two-step real quick to maybe like 38 or 3,900, because I think that should put me right at 40 miles an hour in first gear. So we'll do it again, and maybe it'll get a little bit more aggressive launch, build a couple more pounds of boost maybe. no one behind me. Flick on the two-step tow haul mode so it'll hold first gear once again. I'm actually like 3,800 RPM this time, so it'll be pretty close. So floorboard, there's the boost. About 5 pounds of boost that time before I took off. I was actually a little bit late on the switch, but definitely made a fair improvement by having that two-step on there and let it do its thing. So I don't know if I can try it in second gear, because second gear at that RPM range is going to be kind of fast. So I don't know if it'll work at a lower RPM. Like, let's say I want to do a second roll. Like, here we go, second gear. Well, let's try it. Two-step on, second gear. Well, I didn't engage that time because my RPMs weren't low enough. But because on the MSD thing, you've got to have it like a third of the RPMs below the maximum. So I have it at like 3,800, so you'd have to be 1,000 RPM below that when you engage it. So let's try that again. We're 1,500 RPM now, so I should be able to engage it, have it work. Second gear, tow haul mode. Let's bring it up. Oh yeah, it builds boost way quicker. So I'll have to play around with it and kind of dial in the right setting, but to do a 40 roll, I think I've got to be first gear, about 3,800 RPM on the two-step, 3,900 RPM maybe, and it definitely seems to make a pretty good difference. So I'll play around with this a little bit more, but I'm really liking it. So you guys know what to do. Help me out. Click the like button, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Drop a comment down below. Now, if you are a tuner and if you know some things I could do, maybe I could advance or retard the timing a little bit when the two-step is active. I have heard of guys using like the IAT sensor to kind of play with timing. Like whenever you engage the switch, you can actually use a relay to cut the circuit on the IAT sensor, and because it'll default to negative 40F on the inlet air temps, you can use that to activate a different zone of a timing table. That's kind of a little bit above my head for the moment, but so far two-step's working. So thank you guys for watching. Catch you in another couple of days.